back to Play.Hype.Dialogue. This week, Carlos, Carmela, and myself will be discussing two films in conversation with each other, Judas and the Black Messiah and One Night in Miami. Both films happen to take place in the 1960s. So yeah, let's jump right into it.
Great. Thanks, Omar. So why don't we start? We have two films that are kind of about the late 1960s period of revolutionary movement, Black liberation struggles. Do we want to start? And they're totally different in kind of every way, genre, focus. Do we want to start with just kind of initial first impressions of the films and go around? Maybe Carlos, you want to jump off with that?
Yeah, sure. They were both really interesting and they hit high points in different ways, which I thought was really great because you're not watching the same movie if you watch both of them. They're two very different movies, even though they are sort of snapshots of a very contentious, very hostile, very sort of intense moment in history. I think there's a little bit of levity to be found that we'll talk about a bit in one of them as we go. But overall, I thought they were shot well, acted well, really written well, and we'll sort of get into a bit more of that as we go. But like initial impressions, I thought they were both great films.
What did you think, Omar? First impressions?
I like them. They're like Carlos said, they're super different films, definitely different vibes. One Night in Miami was a slightly easier watch. Even though they both discussed some really difficult topics, it was interesting because I watched that on Friday with a friend of mine, and I didn't need to see something like crazy deep that night. So the singing in One Night in Miami kind of helped, but even though it did talk about some very difficult topics. And then yesterday we watched Judas and the Black Messiah, and that was very heavy to see.
Yeah, definitely. I also felt Judas and the Black Messiah was definitely heavy. They were both super powerful. For me, I think they were both like absolutely beautiful films, cinematically and in terms of direction and creative direction. There's some things that I loved a lot about them. There's a few little nitpicky things that we can talk about them. And there are also really profound films, again, about that struggle for Black liberation and these historical giants and figures that we may be more or less familiar with. In some ways, the two films for me, they're kind of the inverse of each other in the sense that One Night in Miami takes kind of like a historical footnight, this kind of one moment, that of these four men coming together, and builds this whole story out of it. And Judas and the Black Messiah takes this expansive story and this monumental history of Fred Hampton's short and brilliant life, ties it in with the Black Panthers, and takes this really large and profound story and tries to kind of, boil it down enough that it fits into a 2-hour movie. So to me, they were kind of the inverse of each other in that way. And they definitely fed off of each other and complemented each other. I also happened to watch this week The Trial of the Chicago 7 on Netflix, which is not about Black liberation struggles, but it's about the same time period. And I won't get into it because that's not what we're focusing on in this episode, but it was also about that time period and revolutionary politics. And so it was another interesting complement to my experience watching the films.
I just love fun. I just want to watch all of this in one sitting.
Just nothing but films about revolutionary struggle. And I do think it's interesting. A lot of these films, they're coming out at this very timely moment, right after kind of the re-energized surge in the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But these movies, for the most part, were filmed in 2019 or in I guess, going into 2020. So they're surfacing right now, I think is very timely. I think they can be tools for young activists in some ways, but also just popular education tools. And I enjoyed how both One Night in Miami and Judas and the Black Messiah really foregrounded Black liberation struggle. That's like the third time I've said that, so sorry if it's redundant. But I thought they were pretty beautiful. I also think we might want to mention before we move forward with the conversation, if we're comfortable, like, what is our relationship to these historical figures going into the movies?
Yeah, sure. This sort of exposes a little bit of my lack of deep education sort of coming into this. Like, I knew who Fred Hampton was. I knew that he was murdered in his bed very young. I believe he was 21 when he was murdered. But that the power of him as an organizer, as a figure, as a leader of the movement to get these various coalitions of folks together, that's life-changing. And to be able to see that on screen in a moment where there is a lot of intergroup hostility now among different factions and different sort of groups. So it's sort of nice to see that. And then sort of getting into the person of some of the other historical figures. Like, I read the Autobiography of Malcolm X. It was summer reading for high school going into senior year.
Really?
Yeah, our school had us read it. So I was familiar with sort of his story and sort of reading the autobiography of Assata Shakur and others. So it's like cursory knowledge of several different folks, but not a real in-depth knowledge of a lot of things. And to see this sort of these filmic depictions of that was really great to sort of enhance and encourage me to go back and revisit some of these texts and to revisit some of the ones I hadn't gotten around to yet.
Yeah, I'm almost ashamed to say I didn't know most of the figure. I knew of, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, but from Judas and the Black Messiah, I really only knew of Jose Chacha Jimenez, and that was really about it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think this is a big part of people's experience viewing this, because so many of us have a patchy, is patchy the word I'm trying to use? Patchwork understanding of some of this history. For me, I had the like profound experience of growing up being white Italian American person with a white Italian American mother who was part of a Puerto Rican organization that was revolutionary socialist organization. And so a lot of these figures, the history of Fred Hampton in particular, were stories that I was able to learn very young, and have been kind of these monumental historical figures in my eyes for a long time. So I think Judas and the Black Messiah for me, and I think this is one of the powerful points of the film, so much of the story about Fred Hampton, when I would kind of bring it into class teaching in sociology or talk about it, so much of it is about his death. And that's, the profundity of the story is like, wow, the FBI really did a midnight raid and just murdered this 21-year-old among others. And what I loved about that film is that it took the time to flesh out these other areas of Fred Hampton's life. Like, why should his legacy just be his violent death as opposed to his ideas and the work that he was doing and the programs that he was building toward? So I thought that was really beautiful. In terms of One Night in Miami, I'm somewhat familiar with all of the four men who were kind of the foregrounded figures in that. Probably less so Jim Brown, but Sam Cooke, Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X. But when I watched the film, I had to Google, like, was this real? Like that the four of them were friends, and shared this moment in time together. And it is, I mean, obviously there's some creative liberties taken, but that to me, like, I didn't have those men grouped together in my head at all. So that was kind of beautiful. I really, really enjoyed that. I was like, wow.
It's like they had their own like little motley crew going on.
I was like, Sam Cooke, like, right? What? Just different areas of my head. So I really enjoyed that. And I thought what Regina King did with that, with that moment and that story was awesome. But I do think like part of that question about what we know about these figures and what we know about this history, it's not an individualized question of like failures to learn pieces of history. Obviously, like we all want to like, know as much as possible and do our due diligence and everything. But that's a systems failure, right? That this history is not just like, whoopsie, it forgot to make its way into the curriculum. I think that parts of this history are willfully willfully cut out of kind of any popular education or kind of mainstream K through 12 curricula, and even beyond that. I think a lot of work goes into covering up and keeping this history away from many people.
That's what I was surprised when Carlos said the Autobiography of Malcolm X was a signed reading.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and Lord knows my memory is not great, there were a couple of options, but that was one of them that needed to be read. So like at least our school wanted us to at least cursorily engage with his story. And it's particularly relevant because that's also a minor plot point in One Night in Miami that we'll get to. Is that bit of storytelling, what legacy gets left behind, how are people picking up what's left behind by you, or what they make you leave behind in the case of all of these assassinated and murdered leaders. It then becomes a story of death, and their quotes can be launched on Facebook with Instagram fitness pictures or whatever social media apparatus you're using.
Damn. Coming for the influencer.
I know, right?
5 minutes into the episode. It's cool to hear that that's been incorporated in some schools and some curricula. I do think there's more and more of that as time goes on. But nonetheless, the complicity of the U.S. government in the kind of repression of activists of that time period, of revolutionary activists of the late 1960s in particular, I definitely think is kind of like very much tucked away to the side.
Mm-hmm. And let's not front or pretend that just because they're assigning these texts or encouraging us to read them, that they're sort of teaching them or guiding us through any thought processes in a progressive way, in disentangling some of the themes and stuff talked about. Because the more time goes on, the more you hear about people from high school, including the faculty and staff, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what you were doing this whole time.
It's weird. Like seeing your friends on like Facebook, and you're like, oh, wow, I did not realize this when we were friends. So
Yep.
I think that brings it. Yeah. I mean, I do also believe that like power always will reconfigure itself to make room for small kind of symbolic concessions without meaningful systemic change, which I think we've seen a lot of in the last year. Not that I think symbolism is really important and culture is really important, but I do also think it's sort of like, yeah, sure, like read this book or like learn about this story, or like let's make a movie now about this figure or this topic. And like I said, there's a few things out right now that deal with revolutionary struggle, anti-capitalist revolutionary struggle. And it's sort of like, yeah, here's, these pockets of change, but it's not corresponding to large scale kind of systemic changes. So there's that as well. But I think maybe we should just jump into the conversation about casting and age. Cause to me, this was one of my, I don't know if it was even a critique, but these guys were like, Fred Hampton was 21. Carlos already said when he was killed, and Bill O'Neill, who was the Lakeith
Stanfield,
thank you. Lakeith Stanfield character was, I think, like even younger, like 19
or 17 or something, 17, 18.
Yeah, I think he was 17 when he started being an FBI informant. And so you look and you see these grown men portraying these characters. They're like 29 and 31. And it's not it's not the same as seeing really, really young people in those roles. That being said, they were absolutely spectacular. So it's kind of tough. Omar, what did you think? I feel like you wanted to say something.
It was the same thing. It was the same thing. Like the acting was so phenomenal. It was just like, no, it was perfect. But then like, I didn't know how old he was when he died. So I actually, did the Google search while I was watching. I was like, wait, 21. And it's not to say anything about, but that's actually super important that this guy did so much by the time he was 21. And Daniel's acting was unbelievable, but because he's like almost a decade older, you kind of like lose a little bit of the power that he had. To be 20, I can't even imagine 21 and you do all this that's, I think, such a, I don't want to say like that's like a vital part of his story, but it is really important that he was
think it is,
super vital.
And this film's meant to cover like 3 years. So he died at 21, but he was already doing this work at 18 and 19.
Teenager then.
Yeah.
No, that's insane. And so in a sense, like, while the actors did an outstanding job, a part of me would have liked to see more age-appropriate folk being cast, only because it's like I was in shock when I found out how old they all were. Like doing so much, like creating so much community, starting so much, like these programs that they created. I was in shock. So I think that I understand why they didn't, but I almost wonder what it would have looked like if we had seen, because it almost like you're almost like, wait a minute, like these were teenagers.
Yeah, and I think it also lends this weight to when we see like the FBI going after them as this like existential terrorist threat. The idea that this is like some hyper organized, like politically militant, deep organization. And it in many ways it was, not to take those things away from the Panthers, because it was really organized. It was really, politically engaged, and they were doing unbelievable work. But when you see like 19, 20, 21 years old, that it just, I'm not being very articulate right now, but it just hits different, and when you like, they have the couple scenes with J. Edgar Hoover, who was like the FBI director, who was like a grade A shitbag. And that man was about 65, 70 years old in the 1960s. That man was born in the 1800s. I forget what year, but he was born in the in like the 1890s. And it's just like this 70-year-old FBI director was obsessed with the idea that term, the Black Messiah, is what he feared that Fred Hampton would become. He was obsessed with the idea that Black liberation struggles, which were particularly led by very young revolutionary people who were 18, 19, 17, 20, 21 years old, that these were going to be like, pose an existential threat to the country. And not just with the Panthers, but with the Young Lords, who were like briefly mentioned, was also a very young group. And revolutions are always carried on the shoulders of the very young. And I think to see like the like full extent of that state sanctioned violence going after these kids, basically these incredibly young people, I think the physicality of that and seeing that would have carried a particular weight, even though Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield did incredible work.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the problems that Hollywood has is their sort of casting. Like if you watch most shows about high school, it's all like 20-somethings and 30-year-olds playing them. But I think for something like this, being a bit more authentic, to have a good young actor, even if it's a breakout role for them, to like be able to carry this well, because we know there are good young actors. Like there are actors who run the gamut age-wise who could feasibly carry a role like this. Like that would have been dope to see, and perhaps have been inspirational in a different way than I think this is going to be. Because this is already inspirational. I think this is already getting people talking about Fred Hampton, thinking again about sort of intergroup politics. But to see a teenager, like, so I am in my early 30s. I think that's safe to say that we are in our early 30s. 20-year-olds are kids. Like, I'm not trying to be like condescending, but like just knowing how much I've grown in the last decade-ish of years, like there's a lot of growth there. So to see someone that age taking on this part and going through this journey, it would have been dope. Like, and this is not to take away anything from Daniel Kaluuya, because he did that. Like,
yeah, he did.
Brilliant.
And I also feel like the Bill O'Neill character, who's a real person as well with a pretty tragic story, him being 17 when he was recruited to be an FBI informant is again physically hits different than someone in their late 20s who it looks like a full-grown man kind of stepping into that role. And they threw in a few lines, like when he was first running his thing with the fake badge in the beginning of the movie, and his like his hat came off or something, and they were like, "You're not a cop, like he's just a kid." And it just showed Lakeith Stanfield, and I was like,
where is there a kid?
I mean, they look great. You look great, Lakeith. But like, it's just like,
yeah, Lakeith, if you're listening, we're not throwing shade at your age.
If he was a 17-year-old kid, it'd be like, geez, you know, it's a totally different, the exploitation there of a very young person, and kind of throwing this like jail time. You're going to be charged with impersonating. I mean, I think that piece was for the movie, but you're going to be charged with theft, grand theft auto, and all this. And then, you know, it just hits different.
Yeah, like, how do you say no? Like, you're economically struggling, you don't have a lot going for you, and this man comes along and promises you money. Like, we've heard the skeleton of that story in so many tragic tales. Like,
and a lot of people say no. You know, a lot of people find the strength to say no to things like that, but it's still, you know, it's still an exploitative relationship. And I think this movie did a good job of not kind of like putting his role as an informant totally on his back. I did feel, I know some people were like, but I felt that they did a good job of kind of like squarely placing the blame on the FBI for like exploiting whatever they could in that opportunity. You know, nothing's perfect, but I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. What about the casting in One Night in Miami?
Oh yeah, let's talk. By the way, same thing with, I don't know how old the actor was who portrayed Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay in One Night in Miami, but I wanted him to be a little younger as well to show how young he was. Maybe he is, and who knows? But that was an interesting. But yeah, let's talk casting for that movie. I can start. I'm chatting a lot, but so I thought the first few minutes of the movie, I thought Kingsley Benadir, who plays Malcolm X, I was pretty unsure about. First of all, it's like you step into Denzel's like footsteps, and it's just like, who is
you
this?
better act your ass off.
And I was, I was a little unsure. I was not like loving it the first few minutes. However, by like a third of the way into the film, I just thought he was amazing. Like, in fact, I think like give him all the awards. I thought he did a beautiful job of portraying many sides to Malcolm within a story that doesn't have like the dramatic beats of Judas and the Black Messiah. And to see him portray Malcolm in expressing love, some joy. There were some laughs going on early in the film, just the guys joking around with each other. His concern for his conflicts with the Nation of Islam, and then him in the moments that he stepped into his kind of righteous anger or righteous, speeches that he was making. I loved him. I thought he did an amazing job. Even though he didn't like look like Malcolm, necessarily. He got me by like a third of the way or halfway into the film.
The breakout, he was outstanding. The breakout for me, though, I have to say, was Muhammad Ali. I mean, the actor who played, I thought he nailed it from like that. Because here's the thing, to play Muhammad Ali, you have to have that braggadocio, but also be kind of endearing. Because like, I don't know what it is. Like, even though he's like, oh, I'm so pretty, like you never think like, oh, what an arrogant. You're just like, oh, like, like, you are pretty, you own that, you know. But and then like all the little, like the way he moved, like his face, like super animated. So like I thought he completely nailed it. And I know in a sense he's stepping into Will Smith's shoes, but no, I thought he did an amazing job of but I will say, like, in terms of I think the guy Kingsley Ben-Adir for doing Malcolm X, definitely incredible work. Because you're right, he has to do all those different facets of his character, and even kind of show a lot of that inner turmoil that's going on, and you know, it's weird. I actually, part of me feel like there were parts of One Night in Miami, even though it might not be as powerful in terms of what it's portraying. It hit a lot deeper for me. You know, when you see those parts of like that debate of like, oh, well, you're just pandering to the white man. I was like, no, I'm making my money, and I'm, you know, uplifting other people within our community. But then it's like, oh, but you're doing it for, you know, these audiences, and it's like, oh, well, what are you doing that's so much better when all you're doing is making everyone hate us? It was really, really powerful, that whole, because I feel like it's even stuff that we still have these conversations in communities of color, you know, almost like feeling like we need to explain how we make our money or how we measure our success to some who feel maybe we're not doing enough, or others who feel like we're not doing things the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought that was one of the best parts of that film as well. And I know we're leaning a little heavy on Judas and the Black Messiah because we just watched it last night. Full disclosure. But yeah, that was so profound, and it was really that was the meat of the film, right? Was the back and forth, nuanced conversations about what does the struggle for liberation look like? Does it look like building Black wealth? Does it look like revolution or nothing? Does it look like reform within the current system? Does it look like this isn't going to work at all? What are you even doing? Then you have Sam Cooke's, you know, kind of struggle with, well, you have this tool of music. And I thought the whole film, it was just this ongoing, really nuanced conversation about that topic between these figures. I thought that was really that was it. That was the crux of the film. And by the way, while we're talking about casting, I thought Leslie Odom Jr. Also, I wasn't sure for the first few minutes, but my goodness, that I knew it was coming. I was like, this film is going to end on him singing I was born by the river. And oh my goodness, when he did it, I was like, he's nominated for awards now too. I was like, just give him.
It was outstanding. And you know what's something I liked about the film? It was super heavy, but they had these breaks with like the singing. It's almost like they knew, it's like, all right, I think the audience might need a little singing break over here. And I remember I was like, oh, so deep. And then we get a singing break and you kind of like relax a little bit. That's why I love that scene when Malcolm X is telling Sam Cooke, he's like, oh, I saw your shows. And then when he talked about the one in Boston, I thought that was such a beautifully played moment when they're all like sitting on the beds together and he's just like reveling in like the mastery of Sam Cooke stage presence. You know, in a sense, all of them have immense stage presence in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
And it was just a beautiful examination of like Black men sharing love for each other.
Yeah.
which I guess was also like the meat of that film, I think.
And definitely something we need more of. Like these conversations, like you said, Omar, persist where we're still, what is the right way to win? Because one of the sort of maybe sad, tragic underscores of both of these films is that there's still so much work to be done. There's still, like, I saw online, I don't remember who tweeted it, but someone's like, oh, so look at how far we've come from Fred Hampton dying in his sleep in his bed to Breonna Taylor dying in her sleep in her bed. Obviously, the cases are different somewhat, but there's still so much that needs to be done. So to see moments of love in One Night in Miami between these four men, sort of in this real difficult moment where some of them are pivoting, they're trying to figure out their next steps, trying to do what they think is best, to Judas and the Black Messiah, where there's lots of love in the Panthers family, in Fred Hampton's life. The scene with his partner when they're talking about if she regrets having the baby, that's the love that's sort of there, that's sort of something that still needs to, we still need to feel the love. We still need to walk in that love. And I think that these films, in addition to all of the sort of heartbreak that they show, they do attempt to show that love.
Yeah, and while we're talking, before we move away from casting, Dominique Fishkill as Deborah Johnson, who's now Akua Njeri, was phenomenal. I mean, like everybody's saying it, so it's not news, but she was
brilliant.
She was brilliant, and the film's decision to focus on her face while Fred Hampton was being assassinated and to stay on that shot for a really long time was super powerful. I mean, they're like, and she just, I mean, knocked it out of the park. Like, there's nothing I could really say.
Yeah.
And that being said, one thing that also pops into my head as you were talking, Carlos, is that we know what happened to Fred Hampton because activists broke in and stole the records in 1971. And before that, it was just the misinformation, like it always is. It was just like the made up story. Like the story was that, that they came in for a raid, but then the Panthers were shooting, and that the cops said stop shooting 3 times and then came in, and that they were shooting at them so much. And of course, ballistics showed that there was 90 shots from the FBI or from the cops, and 1 shot fired from the guns that the Panthers had. And a lot of people say it was like basically an accidental shot that was fired off. But either way, like we know how many people were implicated in that and how intentional the COINTELPRO tracking of the Panthers was, and the planned assassination of Fred Hampton, again, because activists broke in and got those records. But if we didn't have that, it's just, you go on what the story is, what the cop story is, or what the governmental story is. So I think also when we watch period films that are supposed to portray like the moments after these things happen, we also always have to keep in mind that people were contending in their reactions with the misinformation that was being really intentionally spread around.
So we promise next month will be a lot lighter. This is some heavy stuff, but I think we do.
We went from like Bridgerton to like, talking about like, yo, that
like
was a
the
lot
Duke.
Of, like, facts.
Next month we're doing a comedy or something. So,
but I do think that it's important for us to engage and to have these conversations, because you're absolutely right. We can have some guesses. We can use the historical precedent to assume what is going on now and what will continue to go on, as long as these structures and institutions are in place. But part of the work is telling the truth and getting the truth out there. And I think films like this, and hopefully with their success, we can continue to tell these kinds of stories, and all kinds of other stories as well. There are so many stories to tell. But they really did the damn thing with these. Like, these are, whew.
Do we want to talk a little bit more about gender while we're here? Or do we feel like
more? We haven't even.
I mean, we mentioned a woman. That's the extent of our gender talk.
Well, no, I mean, we talked about masculinity a little bit, but
yeah. But I do think it is something for us to jump into. So Dominique Fishkill, amazing, playing Deborah Johnson now, Akua and Jerry. Brilliant. She comes in, is one of the sort of challenges to sort of Fred Hampton. They have a sort of nice tit for tat in the beginning, and sort of critiquing his methods a little bit. And she's a poet, she's an artist, so she's coming at it from this different angle. But she's one of the main sort of women characters in this story, and has a bit juicier part than the woman who played, I believe, Sam's wife in One Night in Miami, who's there for like
a cameo,
like 2 seconds.
That was Leslie Odom Jr.'s wife, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think so.
That's so cute.
I should probably fact check that before I'm saying things, but I think it was.
See this in like Judas and the Black Messiah. I mean, obviously, I think they dealt more with women than One Night in Miami. Which I'm not gonna like blame One Night in Miami. It was about these 4 men, so I get that. But it was interesting because you see, with like Hampton's partner, her strength. But then also there was the other one. I'm missing her name, but the other one who was sort of like the main one in this shootout between.
I think Harmon was her last name, or Harmond or something.
Yeah.
And I know she's not a real that's not like a one real person. They said she was like an amalgamation of women in the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
Character, which a few of them were a few of those like kind of side characters were amalgamation characters.
You see a lot of like I don't want to say like in a sense it was like the sort of central leadership that women held, but they didn't get as much, screen time, of course, as Fred Hampton and I forget the name of the informant.
Bill O'Neill.
So
wow, Bill.
Wow, Lick Willie. That's completely different. I'm sorry. I forgot.
Levity. You have to throw in the levity.
I thought that Judas and the Black Messiah did a pretty good job of making sure that the Deborah Johnson role was fleshed out, and was not just about strength, and was not just about self-sacrifice, and was not just about being the partner or just about the pregnancy. I think Dominique Fishkill had a really big role in that. I do think there was a lot of intentionality. It seems, I mean, who knows, but it seems from reading about it and watching the film, it seems there was a lot of intentionality on the part of the whole creative team in making sure that role was fleshed out and not a caricature and not a stereotype and not, an accessory role. I know she is still alive, and she and her son, Fred Hampton Jr., were cultural consultants on the film. And I know she spoke with the director about like what the actual moments of the FBI raid looked like and felt like. So I think that's like pretty profound. I thought the Harmon character, I'm forgetting what her first name was supposed to be, but the was interesting, and I think they did a good job of addressing the fact that, I mean, that the Panthers were working with intentionality on gender, right? Not that they were perfect, because I know that there was a lot of pushback at moments in their history because they weren't, but I thought the film covered it pretty well. And to talk about One Night in Miami, there were very few women in that film.
Yeah, but you did have Malcolm X talking a lot with his wife Betty Shabazz.
Yeah, and I loved her portrayal. I thought was really good, but it was still a relatively small part. But I think that made sense in that film, like Omar said. And I thought Regina King, as a Black woman directing the film about these 4 Black men, I know she wrote about and spoke about having wanted to do a love story and seeing the film as a love story. And I thought that was really powerful as well. And I thought it showed in her directorial choices and the shots and the framing. Like, in terms of directing, I would have to give it to Regina King. I just think, like,
yeah, for sure.
I thought her direction of that film, which could have been like, it could have been a boring film, because it's like, what is this film about? I was like, what am I about to watch? In some ways, like,
One Night in Miami,
okay, but it's
obviously.
2 hours long. What and it was not. It was beautiful. It was not boring at all. The framing of her shots was done with such care, and such a focus on the relationship between the men at different moments. And I just thought her direction of that film was beautiful. So that's my hot take.
Yeah. No, I remember when there was like, we're gonna have a party. I was like, the Malcolm X through? Yeah, I think this was gonna be fun.
There was ice cream though, Omar.
Listen, good company and ice cream is a party. I remember like watching it. I was talking with my friend. I was like, damn, like, because it's a party, and then he's like going on like Sam Cooke and so I was like, oh, what kind of party is this? So, but it was, and I like the moment on when they had to go to the roof, because you also kind of saw like, and like they called it like, oh, he's being paranoid, but it was like that it was genuine fear that he had.
Yeah,
knowing that something was coming, and it's also interesting because you kind of see him right before his trip to Mecca, which is such a life-changing experience for him. So, and it was because I feel like people either when they talk about Malcolm X, they sort of see him as like the way before pre-Mecca, like very invested nation of Islam, or post-Mecca, and this is like sort of like an in between those two periods. And you see a lot of that. And I know I said it before, like that, like internalized struggle, but it was really something.
I was just gonna double back to what you were saying about One Night in Miami. Like, in addition to picking this particular moment and this particular story to tell, especially in the life of Malcolm X, that for One Night in Miami, Tammy Raker, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was the director for photography. So you have a Black woman director, and you have a woman as the cinematographer, sort of shaping these men. And you can tell that this was a project put together with a bit more love than it may have been in other hands. So just sort of seconding and underscoring what you're saying about the various choices made to tell this story and light it this way and have it look this way and the shots be framed this way and the characters to play well. Like, you could see that paranoia, you could see that fear, you could see that I think you were saying transition, Omar, like you can see it happening, and then you get to witness other transitions for other characters as well, sort of in that same space with One Night in Miami.
Yeah, definitely. So we've been like I feel like we've been pretty positive in terms of our take on these films. And I do think these are two of the best films. These are two of the best films I'd say I've seen in like a long time. do we have critiques that anybody wants to jump in? This is not a critique. This is just a small thing that I want to say now because I won't think of it. It's not a critique. I thought we were going to see a little more of the Young Lords because they were in the trailer. There was a shot in the trailer when he said, "We're doing a Rainbow Coalition," and it's like, and I was like, "Oh, it's going to be cool." But that shot from the trailer was basically all that's in the film. There was like one little piece of Chacha Jimenez talking. And I guess it didn't fit. Like there was no need, but
yeah,
I was like, oh.
it was. And I remember being like wanting to learn a little bit more about the Rainbow Coalition as well, because I was like, how are the Young Patriots? And
I did think it was going to be a bigger part of the story.
Only because I was just so shocked. To like, how did these guys all work together? Like, I just wanted to see what like just one scene where like how a meeting looked like between these groups. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah.
And I read, sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't have like jumping off of that, my not problem with the movie is that I hope it's successful enough that we can get not sequels, but like other films about the other groups in the Rainbow Coalition to see more of that coming together. Because full disclosure, don't take my Boricua card. Like, I don't know a lot about the Young Lords. Like, that's not really a history that I was taught or that I learned. So I would love to see a film like this of that, a film of Angela Davis's life, of Asada Shakur's life, of Betty Shabazz, like to sort of continue to build out. Like there's so many names and faces and stories that we have of this era to continue to pull them out and to sort of tell them, which sounds good, but then I'm also like, but then is it something that's going to be co-opted and twisted and sort of the ways that can go wrong in telling these stories and retelling these stories? But I just want more. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. Give me more.
I'm sure a Young Lords film is coming. Like, I feel like the Young Lords have been getting like a lot of play in the last few years. And I think more political films are coming, and I think probably a good amount of them are going to not be great, as is so often the case in the portrayal of radical politics. And I also think the Young Lords are like not the end all be all of Puerto Rican radical politics. I think they were super significant, but there were a lot of groups then and in the intervening years since the late 60s. So I'd be into anything focused on any of that. I do have a critique. It's pretty much.
Let's see, Carmela. Let's see.
What is it? In the like third quarter of Judas and the Black Messiah, there was a couple scenes back to back of the Panthers engaging with cops in one way or another. It was I know Winters was the second character, but I'm forgetting the name of the first character who was walked into the store when cops were like stop and frisking a couple of older Black men, and then they get in a shootout, and then he goes to the hospital and is then recovering, but then mysteriously is killed in his transfer to another hospital. Does everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm gonna look him up. Jimmy Palmer?
Jimmy Palmer is the first character. So that Jimmy Palmer scene where he stands off with those couple cops in the store, my critique is that I think they played a couple of scenes back to back. That scene, the following scene where the other character kills the police officer on the ground, that was real, although like it was dramatized, and then he's killed. And then there's the shootout at the Black Panthers headquarters. Those three scenes are played kind of quickly in succession to each other. My critique is this: I don't believe that the Panthers like stepped into conflicts with the police with their hands on a gun, ready to have a shootout. And in the scene with Jimmy Palmer in particular, he came in and put his hand back to go for the gun. early in the scene. And I felt that that's a little bit of a misportrayal, and I'm not sure why they chose to play it like that. And in the shootout at the Black Panthers headquarters, where all the cops are lined up and yelling, and then the woman character,
Judy Harmon,
thank you, comes to the window with the shotgun and basically is portrayed as the one to escalate it to actual shots. I also don't believe that was the case. I feel that that's like largely how cops portrayed their interactions with the Black Panthers. But most evidence is to the contrary, right? That usually it was cops that escalated situations to the level of violence or to the level of shootout or to straight up assassinations. So I felt that in that stretch of the film, I'm not sure why they chose to portray it that way. Like the Panthers were just like pulling out their guns in conflicts that they would have known would not end well for them, when most evidence points to that not having been the case. I will, in that third scene where the other Panther kills two cops and then is killed in like a spray of gunshots, that's mostly did happen to that person. But I thought that like succession and that kind of gratuitous filming of that shot was not my favorite. Just in particular I felt that they, again, like portrayed it back to back as the Panthers escalated the violence. And I felt that was not necessary have a ton of evidence.
Yeah, I think just in the in-film explanation would be the opposite of that as well. Like you have Bill going to Fred like, I got C4, let's go blow up this building. Right. And he's like, no, we're not going to do that. Like, we're not going to, like, because if we bomb them, they're going to bomb us. That's not how we're fighting this fight. So in movie logic, in the sort of overarching story, it would not make sense for these things to happen the way they were shot, the way they were portrayed. So just to sort of underscore, it's like, why that choice? Why show those scenes that way with those actions leading to that result? Yeah. If that's probably not accurate to the true story as told by the Panthers themselves.
Yeah, so that was the only thing for me. And it was weird because it contrasted with some of the other in-film elements, like them showing Fred Hampton getting locked up for like some petty like supposed
7 years for like
theft of ice cream or something. Yeah. So they, in so many ways, they're so intentional about showing the pattern of repression, basically, of the pattern of use of state-sanctioned violence to kind of repress this group that, was revolutionary, but also was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And so not to take away, like, because I do think that the party believed in armed self-defense and armed struggle when necessary.
For sure.
I don't believe that they frequently, like, started armed, like, gun exchanges with the cops if it wasn't already escalated. So that was just a weird kind of, it was particularly that first scene with Jimmy Palmer for me when he walked in and just like went for the gun. And I was like, really? Like, but that's just, I'm not sure. Maybe they had reasons for going for that narrative.
Yeah. That was, yeah.
You know what is weird? This scene that keeps sticking out to me is when oh gosh, I forgot his name, the NFL star.
Jim Brown.
Yeah. When Jim Brown goes to that White House, white people's house, and like the daughter's like, who are you? He's like, oh, you're the NFL star. Wait a minute, come on. And then the grandpa comes out, and it seems like there's a lot of like love between the guys. And then he's like, you want me to help your furniture? It's like, oh, we don't let N-words in the house. I was like, wait, what? I don't know why that scene stuck out to me so much. Because he treated him so warmly. He let him drink, like, he shared a glass of lemonade. And then I was like, oh, I don't know why. I almost wanted there to be something else from that. It was such a shocking scene to see.
You know what struck me about it, Omar, was that I was expecting him to say, the like older white man to say something wild when they were out on the porch having lemonade together. You know, like I was waiting. I'm like, what is this guy going to say? You know what I mean? I was waiting for something to happen there. And when it didn't, then they got up and I was like, all right, like, I guess that's the scene. And they're like about to end. And then he drops that line and you're just like, what? I think for me, that was like, I kind of had been waiting for the shoe to fall, the shoe to drop, whatever that and it didn't. So I was like, I guess this scene is something else, and then it does. But it was a little like, that was a scene I'm not sure that they like fully followed up on that. There was a moment later in the film that he was having this contemplative moment.
I thought he was gonna like talk about it, like when they were formed. He's like, I saw this guy who, we've been close, and look what he said. Like I almost was like, all right, when he let's see what he says when he goes back to address this, but he didn't. But I guess maybe the scene is partly like to, and like helps you understand why he made that shift in his career.
Yeah, and I felt that in some of those middle of the movie scenes, or kind of even toward the end, when he's having his moment, he's like stares at himself in the mirror at one point or something, and then he's talking. I think that maybe we're meant to understand that he's thinking about moments like that, where he gets like a certain semblance of access, but then is still met with like virulent racism. But yeah, it was an interesting scene because it was pretty powerful, and then they didn't necessarily pick back up on it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sort of overarching critiques of any of these sort of real life or based on real life stories, is that there's only so much you're going to be able to fit in a movie. And so depending on when you watch and how you're watching, you want more. Like, you want to see more of Sam Cooke's sort of journey after this, given the sort of transition there. You want to see more about sort of the lead up and what happens, and the sort of, like, there's so many, like, there's like a cinematic universe here, because you've got like the Muhammad Ali movie, and you can tie that, like, you can connect so many different parts, but it's still not the whole story, which you're never going to get.
Not a cinematic universe, being the real universe.
The civil rights cinematic universe.
Not Carl is saying there's a cinematic universe. Like, there's a cinematic universe here. US history.
I mean, yeah, because we're putting the different parts together. I know that's cheesy and cliche, and I'm not trying to make light of this, but like, you do want more, and you're not going to get it because it's only an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like, once you get into 2.5 hour movie long territory, it's like, make it a multi-part series, but I think sort of that critique is always going to be there, sort of, and I got to shut it up. I'm like, stop, don't, because you can only fit so much in a movie.
Right.
Yeah. True.
I do. So I know this is a thing that's not new or not unique, but a lot of people, I imagine, will react to One Night in Miami kind of the way folks reacted to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It feels a bit more like a play. Like, it's a lot more.
I was going to say that. I said it could have been a play in a sense.
I think it was a play.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a, like, you can tell. If you didn't know, and clearly I didn't, bad researcher me, you can tell, like, there's some scenes that, like, help it to fit better on screen. Like, there's scenes in the car. They deliberately move location so that we're not in the room the whole time. They have those prologues where it's like you see each of the characters and where they're coming from. And then you have the scene with Malcolm X's home life. So, like, you do get some multiple locations, but it does, it feels different. I'm not going to say it's bad, because it's not bad. It's just a different type of film than what you get with Judas and the Black Messiah, which is definitely a movie. Like, it is put together with the screen in mind. Though I do think it transitioned, One Night in Miami transitioned well from stage to screen, because it didn't feel as much of a play as some other films you see that sort of transition and don't hit some of the same movie beats, but that's not really that's a critique, but it's not like a damnation of the movie. You should watch them both.
Yeah.
So I think then we should wrap up with this episode. Unless anybody has any kind of like,
Do we want to do like favorite scenes, or I guess
we
there's
can
not.
try.
Like, what's your favorite scene?
I just thought about it. I
Favorite
was
scene
like,
doesn't feel right.
Yeah, never mind.
Maybe do we want to give it hype stars and like see if it's worth people checking out, worth the hype?
So before we give our hype stars and kind of our final takeaways, Carlos is going to come with some really important information and that he'd like to share. And here he goes.
Thanks for letting me break into the episode, Mela. I'm here to talk to you today about the Giving Project. The Giving Project is a crowdfunding project for social justice organized through the North Star Fund. Over the past few months, we've come together to learn about fundraising and advance a model for social justice that centers on collective fundraising from the community, where we, the community, fund us and the work that we desire to see happen in our community. This model bypasses the racism of traditional philanthropy, where less than 10% of all money goes to communities of color, even less to Black-led organizations. Black-led organizing has done so much great work around the country in the last few months, in the last few years, and arguably throughout U.S. history. So it is so important to fund this work. This year, given the intensity that was this past summer with the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the protests in response, the Giving Project has decided that all funds raised through the Giving Project will go to the Let Us Breathe Fund, which is the only New York City-based fund led by and for Black activists around the project of Black liberation, something very apropos for what we're talking about in today's episode. So through the course of these last few months, we've learned about giving, about philanthropy, and about how we as our community can come together and fund these important works. So part of that is me coming to you, our listeners, to ask you to join me in donating to the Giving Project. The deadline for our fundraising goal is March 10th, but you can feel free, if you're hearing this episode afterwards, to still check out what the Giving Project is up to when you're listening, and to donate to the organizations that are funded this year or that will be funded in future Giving projects. It's so important that we come together to support us. Black-led organizing, Black grassroots organizing has done so much amazing work. Instead of tweeting, thank an organizer, we can thank an organizer by paying an organizer and continuing to fund the work that is going to bring about the social change that, if you're listening to the show, you probably desire as much as we do. So please consider joining us. The link will be in our show notes, as well as in my bio at Carlos Creates 2018 on Instagram, where you can also find more information, or check out at North Star Fund on Instagram or northstarfund.org. Thanks so much. And with that, let's get back to the episode. So thanks for listening to me give my spiel. So did we want to give our hype stars to One Night in Miami and Judas and the Black Messiah?
Yeah, five for both.
Yeah, it's so hard. It feels so weird giving hype stars.
I'm not giving anything less than five. They deserve fives. Only because I think that they're very both incredibly important films. Would I say I prefer to watch one over the other? Yes, but it's more not because of the movie, it's just because like Judas and the Black Messiah it was really difficult to watch at some moments, that it just made it like almost not draining in a bad way. It's just like draining because like this is life, you know. But definitely 5 hype stars for both. Go watch it. Let us know what you think, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it really feels a little weird to do hype stars for these films, especially if we were to like compare these with like a Bridgerton or whatever like comedy film we watch for next month. I'd have to basically agree with Omar and say I really felt that these were 2 of the best films I've seen in a while. I think in the case of Judas and the Black Messiah, the story is just Fred Hampton's story being told in a Hollywood film that does a pretty good job, not perfect, but a pretty good job of like portraying his revolutionary politics, politics of love, politics of community, and again, not being just about his violent death is just really profound. And I will be rewatching it. I have promised to rewatch it with my fiance this week. So I will be rewatching it this week. I would say One Night in Miami really struck me for how good that movie was, with, again, like a relatively kind of, like a momentary kind of gathering in a room type premise, and everything it did with that movie far exceeded my expectations. I went in like, oh, this sounds kind of interesting, but I don't know what I'm stepping into. And I thought the performances were amazing. The directing was amazing. So for our purposes, I would say, it's got to be 5 stars for both, because these films don't compare with other things that we've watched. Like they're not in the same universe. This isn't like, something you could stack up next to Bridgerton or Cursed or like whatever. I do think for similar reasons that Omar said, One Night in Miami is a little bit more rewatchable for me as well, because Judas and the Black Messiah is I mean, they're both kind of have their painful moments, so they can both be heavy, especially because we know, watching One Night in Miami, that Sam Cooke and Malcolm X both died within months of when this moment was supposed to take place. So they're both pretty heavy. But I think One Night in Miami has a few more moments of levity and music. So yeah, 5 stars, great films, definitely recommend. And there's a lot of commentary going around about these films, which I think is part of their power, part of their profundity.
Yeah. I definitely think that folks should watch both of these films. I think that Judas and the Black Messiah in particular is one that I think will have rewatchability, in the sense that I would show it to my students and watch it with them, and then have a conversation about either revolutionary politics, about programs, how history is written and rewritten, who gets to tell the story, that I think works a bit better with that one than One Night in Miami, sort of as a tool for sort of teaching. But I think they're both brilliant, acted their asses off, every single actor, whether they were in the film the whole time, or like the woman who played Judy Harmon in like the brief scenes that she was in, like, was acting her ass off. The acting was amazing. The cinematography and lighting in One Night in Miami in particular. So if you look at them as whole films, as genre pieces, as historical teaching tools, as I mean, we've been talking about them in conversation, because we see One Night in Miami end with things getting more intense with Malcolm X's life. We know in the beginning of Judas and the Black Messiah that he's already been murdered. So like they sort of fit together as historical puzzle pieces to sort of put them back to back, which is coincidentally how I watched them yesterday back to back, which was not good for my feelings by the end of the night, but I definitely recommend watching them. So I think I'm going to give 5 out of 5 for both. Definitely watch them, have a conversation, read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley, read up on Fred Hampton. Like, we are PhDs, we read a lot, we talk a lot. So here's your homework. On season 2, you finally get homework.
Don't you?
I thought of one other thing I just had to say as we're ending, which is that toward the end of Judas and the Black Messiah, Fred Hampton is saying, we're spending all this time focusing on me. Is the movement about me, or is the movement about the people? I think he says a couple things throughout the film that also speak to the role that the film itself can play, or at least the conversations that emerge out of the film can play, which is that shifting that focus and that clear-eyed kind of sorry, I'm just going to reuse the word focus, to the struggle for Black liberation that people really get it. And sometimes we can get tied up in these historical figures and giants. But I think with Judas and the Black Messiah, first of all, again, the story about Fred Hampton's politics not just being about his death and being about what he was trying to advance is really powerful. And the focus, as we're in a moment right now where there's an ongoing struggle for Black liberation and for people's liberation and for anti-capitalist liberation, I think, stories told through the lens of historical figures are really powerful, but they also bring to the forefront the conversation about the issues themselves.
Sure.
Yep. And we all got to start somewhere. So if this is your starting point, welcome.
All right. Well,
I don't know why we were all just like...
I was like, is anyone going to throw in a last minute, like, well, actually, I have something else to say.
It's like, oh, but it's an ongoing starting point. I was like, well, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's exactly that. It's like,
we're going to wrap this up.
Because we can keep going, clearly.
Thank you for joining us for this super lighthearted episode of Play.Hype.Dialogue. Thank you for joining us as we discuss Judas and the Black Messiah and One Night in Miami. Let us know what you thought. Our Instagram handle is Play.Hype.Dialogue. Wait, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, sorry, it's been a while. All right, so see you guys at some point.
We'll see you next month.
Let us know what we should watch and record for our next episode. All right.
Yes, we need ideas for a fun film for March.
Give us homework.
Hit us up.
Yeah, right. All right. Bye.
Peace.